It is Wednesday here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo. We want to talk about our latest mock drafts that we've done for you and sort of set them side by side, compare and contrast. Where do we see the Steelers going as we are just 8 days away from the first round of the NFL draft? It's the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo. We're your Steelers writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Not only will they help you when you're injured in an accident, they'll also help you fight for your workers' compensation rights. Be sure to call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Right. Let's talk about our mock drafts. Now, mine published, I believe, Tuesday. Yours is coming out Friday. So this is a bit of a sneak peek into what you'll be able to read. But when you read it, you'll be able to go into more of the depth why Ray picked it where he picked. But I want to set our mocks side by side. These are 7-round mocks of the Steelers. We'll look more at the full first round and kind of things next week once we get into the actual draft week as far as where that is. But looking at how we have these things laid out, I want to go step by step through this draft to compare and contrast where we think the Steelers are going and why we're honing in on certain positions in other areas versus and what other alternative routes there could be if those things aren't there. So let's cut to the chase here, Ray. You and I had the same first-round pick at different spots. We both went Derrick Harmon, defensive lineman out of Oregon, top 30 visit. We know that they've liked him. The Cam Hayward comparisons are there. I traded back to 31 and got him. You stayed pat at 21 and got him. There are a lot of people who think Derrick Harmon won't last to 31. There's some people who think that he will. I think, though, it's the important point here, though, is we're both looking at this and saying, hey, that's a guy who fits exactly what they're looking for in the first round.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can break it down several different ways, Chris. Let's just look at it from a defensive line perspective overall. Yes, Harmon is a future replacement for Cam Hayward at 5 technique. They also don't have a starting 3 technique on their line, and they don't have a traditional space-eating nose tackle in the traditional sense that could help you stop the run. Keanu Benton is kind of a hybrid. He's a guy who plays nose, but he's not he's got a lot of versatility to him. And, I don't know that run defense is his strength. So I could actually see the Steelers going in a number of directions there. They can get their 3 technique in Walter Nolen. They can get their nose tackle in Kenneth Grant. So I went with Harmon. I just think it makes a lot of sense with Hayward getting to the age where he is. The 3-down ability, you go for a Kenneth Grant, that's probably not going to be there at least early in his career. So get your future replacement 5 technique. It's a really important part of your defense. I say kick Keanu Benton out to 3 and then maybe go get a nose late. And we'll talk about that later when we get into my day 3 picks, but that's the direction I wanted to go. I think Harmon could be there at 21. And if he is, I think he's a strong possibility for the Steelers.
I think that he fits a lot of things that they want to do. And certainly you and I, if anyone's watched this show over the past few months, you and I have not been shy about how we think the Steelers' top priority should be getting one of these top-tier defensive tackles. Harmon certainly fits that bill, alongside Nolen and Grant, after Mason Graham goes most likely in the top 10. But so, Ray, looking at that, though, we're both in agreement that's a great first-round target. If they land him, that's a mission accomplished. But as our friend Brian Batko did for Wednesday, he did a worst case scenario draft where he kind of ran through the top 20 picks ahead of the Steelers and what would be the worst case scenario. And in his situation, he had Nolen, he had Harmon and Grant all off the board before the Steelers pick. So defensive tackle would be off the board here. Now in that situation, and it's funny, I kind of explored this a little bit on a radio show with the Raiders Nation radio network where they had me do a Steelers mock, and Jahdae Barron was available. Now I like Jahdae Barron a lot. I think he's a flexible outside and slot guy with great ball production, tested well, as an athlete. Is that a direction that you think the Steelers would be willing to go, is looking at cornerback, even though cornerback was not one of the heavier positions that they took the closest look at? Do you think they might try to go like receiver with Emeka Egbuka or someone like that?
Yeah, they did bring in 3 for top 30 visits. They brought in Trey Amos from Ole Miss. They brought in Justin Wally, who's more of a late-round pick from Minnesota, and they also brought in Azaria Thomas from Florida State. And Thomas, I suppose, of all those guys, he's probably second round like Amos, but there has been a little bit of buzz about him maybe being early second, late first. So I guess you would have to consider him maybe in first round range for the Steelers, if that was to happen. But as far as Barron goes, he didn't come in for a visit. Now they did go to his pro day.
They did.
So that versatility for him would be nice. When I look at corner though, Chris, you're going to play Darius Slay this year because he's making $10 million a year. Mm-hmm. You signed Brandon Echols. You got Beanie Bishop there. Listen, if you draft a guy like Barron, could he be your starting slot corner if he impresses? Yeah, he could be. But you would also be ignoring, your other bigger needs. I think they could have different scenarios there other than a corner. I'm not a big quarterback guy, but you could talk me into a running back if Omarion Hampton is there. You could talk me into a couple of different positions, before you could corner, I think.
I think that's the thing here is what position would be of prime importance to the Steelers at that point, and also where what situation leads to them trading back. Like in the trade back situation that I traded back because Grant was gone, and I said, you know what, Grant was my higher rated player. I thought that, according to the simulation that I was using, I was looking at, hey, Harmon probably will be available later, gambled on that, and he was, and that's how I hit there. But I think that's also, what are the Steelers' conditions on, if such and such isn't there, where do they feel like comfortable trading back, and who do they even trade back with? That is not always an easy thing to accomplish.
No, and trading back 10 spots, boy, Chris, you better know you're going to get one of several players, right? I think it's much easier to trade back 3 or 5 spots, because if you have 2 or 3 targets there that you'd be happy with, pretty good percentage that you're going to land one of those guys. When you trade back 10 spots, things get a little bit murky. People can jump ahead of you. Other teams can take guys that you want. That's a little bit more dicey. So, we'll see how it goes. But I do think if a trade back happens, I think it'll probably be more into the mid-20 range than the late 20s, early 30s. But we'll see what kind of magic Omar Khan can wield in that situation.
Certainly. We'll go over our mid-round picks in the next segment here, the different directions we went there and who we looked at all next here on the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Did you know they also do workers' compensation? When you've been hurt on the job, do you know who decides when you're better? Do you know who decides when your treatment's over? And do you know who decides when your benefits are over? The answer to every one of those questions is actually the insurance company's doctors. That doesn't probably make you feel any better about the situation. And if that's the case, you need to call Edgar Snyder Associates today, because if you call 1-800-94-EDGAR, they're going to fight for your workers' compensation rights that you deserve and make sure that you're represented in the best way. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Call 1-800-94-EDGAR for Edgar Snyder and Associates. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's go to our middle picks here in this draft class, because this is where we both went in similar directions as far as positions, just in different orders. Now, I also, because of my trade back in my mock draft, I traded back with the Chiefs. I think the key thing here is if the ideal situation for the Steelers to trade back, if they really wanted to recoup a day 2 pick and an earlier day 2 pick, they would need to find a team like the Chiefs in this situation who wanted to jump up significantly in the first round and has that extra day 2 pick to burn. And that's what the Chiefs have with the Titans third round pick. That's why I went and got that pick. That led to me being able to draft a Dylan Sampson there in the 3rd round. Running back, to me, Ray, which we both address in different ways in our day 2 picks, day 2 and early day 3. But running back to me is still such a priority for this team.
Yeah.
They had 9 running backs come in top 30, but I don't know the last time they did that. I landed Dylan Sampson in the 3rd with that early pick. You had Bhayshul Tuten out of Virginia Tech with that 4th round pick. But I think both of these guys share something. They're faster and more explosive running backs than what the Steelers normally have normally had with Najee Harris.
Yeah, let's break down the 9 running backs that they brought in, because I was a little bit surprised that they brought in so many small running backs. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the roster right now, you have Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell. Both of those guys are 5'8"-ish. Now, they both play – I would say especially Warren, but I think Warren plays bigger than his size, and that can be good and that can be bad, because I do think he's susceptible to getting injured more. But bottom line is they have 2 small backs on the roster right now. So you would think they might target a big back, a guy for short yardage goal line situations. And they brought in Caleb Johnson, and they brought in Ollie Gordon. But those are really the only 2 big backs. Giddens is what? DJ Giddens maybe 6 foot. I guess he's somewhere in the middle. But look at Jadon Blue, his height. Sampson is 5'8". Bhayshul Tuten is 5'8", 5'9". I would say they brought in probably twice as many smaller types of backs than they did those bigger backs. So, it's interesting. Travion Henderson as well, another smallish back. So it's going to be interesting to see, their mindset there. You could have 3 small backs and, you could figure out goal line as you go. I mean, one of those guys would step up and would handle those duties. But that's the one thing that stuck out to me. If they would have brought in 2 more bigger backs, I would have thought, okay, I'll take Gordon or I'll take Caleb Johnson, and I'd go from there. But they brought in so many smaller backs, it almost makes me think that they want a specific type of back for Arthur Smith's offense, and maybe that's the direction that they're going to go.
It seems like, they're going for guys that can go for explosive plays. They want guys that are going to get big yards when those lanes open up. And granted, this is all going to hinge on, can this offensive line actually take steps forward this year? They took some steps forward last year, but not enough to become the stronger unit that I think they really wanted to be, especially late in the season. They really couldn't get the run game going. Arthur Smith used the metaphor. He compared it to, starting up an old truck, where it's like, it takes a little bit to get it going, but once it's going, it's steady and it's replaceable. I think they don't want the truck. They want the Ferrari. They want that thing to start as soon as they turn that key, or they don't have keys no more. They push buttons to start cars, and they go and they want to get going. They want to go fast. That's what it seems to be what they're doing with this running back room. So that's certainly a priority for day 2 and early day 3 of the draft. And again, in your scenario, the Steelers, naturally, if the Steelers don't make any trades, they have 1 day 2 pick. So it's going to be important to land that. You, though, with your day 2 pick, you went for Tyler Shough, the Louisville quarterback. I waited until day 3, even with my 2 day 2 picks. I got Tate Ratledge, the guard out of Georgia, because I loved his athleticism. I know guard's not exactly a priority for the Steelers, but I thought, man, if you can get a guy that I personally think could be the best guard of this draft class, athletic wise, if you could get him, he could become a Sam Ollie replacement in the short term, competition for Mason McCormick, or in the long term, and then competition for Mason McCormick in the short term. And that could further emphasize the offensive line that Andy Waddle wants to put together. But then I did get Will Howard in the 4th round there. I think it's just a comparison of what kind of a backup quarterback that you want. With Tyler Shough, when you went, that's the guy that's a much more polished quarterback than most quarterbacks in this draft class.
Yeah, so here's my thinking with quarterback. If you're going to take one in this draft, you might as well take one who has the biggest upside. And I think other than Cam Ward, I think Tyler Shough is that guy. I mean, if you look at his athleticism, Chris, people say he didn't run in college, and that's true. Probably had to do with his injury history. Probably had to do with the offenses he was in. But please don't tell me that if you run a 4.6 140, that a guy like Arthur Smith isn't going to dial some things up for you and take advantage of that in the running game. So I'm thinking like Ryan Tannehill type of stuff here, right? Mm-hmm. Good passer, can make some plays, can get a first down for you when need be. He's not going to be Lamar Jackson or anyone like that, but you could do the read option with him. You could do quarterback sneaks with him. I mean, 4.61 for a guy who's 6'5" is impressive. And I think even though the injury history is there, you wouldn't want to expose him too much. He has that in him. But above and beyond that, he's probably got the most arm talent in this draft. Maybe Cam Ward slightly ahead of him, but this guy can make all the throws. Different college programs, but that could be a positive too, because he's seen a bunch, right? Different offenses, different playbooks, also different defenses in the various stops that he's been in across the country. So, Will Howard would be good. I think his ceiling is probably as a backup or as an average starter. There are other guys like that in this draft. I just think this might be more of a boom or bust pick. He could turn out to be nothing, but like I said, if you're going to take a flyer on a quarterback, you might as well take one who's got some upside.
One of the things that also I think Tyler Shough has on top of the athleticism, by the way, your point about 4'6", for people to compare, if you're a listener, you're a viewer here, think about how Patrick Mahomes runs, right? Patrick Mahomes isn't fast, but he knows how to pick. If he chooses his right spot, he can pick up a lot of yards real quick. Patrick Mahomes ran a 4'8". So like that's a comparison of like Shough. That 4'6" is fast for a tall, long quarterback. Like he's gonna be able to pick up ground when the space is there. So to your point, I definitely think that's part of a weapon. But one thing that when I look at Shough's tape and then I read about like what people really like about him, it's that his ability to process at the line. Like he opened up like pro style adjustments at the line of scrimmage with Louisville's offense because he's 26 years old, because he has so much experience. He's had the time to go over things. He's a lot more polished. He's in a lot of ways, he's the thing that a lot of people said Kenny Pickett would have been, or he has more reason to be the thing that a lot of people that said Kenny Pickett would be, as far as being a pro-ready quarterback with the ability to process and go at the line. And the good thing is, if you get him in the third round, like you did, Ray, you're not spending a first-round pick to get that guy. Right. You're saying, hey, this is probably a backup. This is probably just a bridge guy that's going to help us down the line, a lot like how Mason Rudolph has been. But he comes up with that upside that maybe the ascension for him to be ready to play in an NFL game is not as high of a hill to climb.
Yeah, and I'll try to look this up before the end of the show. But I bet you Tyler Shough and Kenny Pickett had similar grades coming out. If you look at NFL.com and the way they scout quarterbacks, I bet you they were fairly close. So, and yeah, I think you're right. Just being NFL ready, being 26 years old. I mean, Mason Rudolph is 29 years old. Skylar Thompson's been in the NFL since 2022, I think. And wow. I think he's only 25 or 26 years old. Okay. I'm writing a QB analysis for Sunday's paper. It's our final position analysis of the season. Skylar Thompson has started as many playoff games as Mason Rudolph. So I'm getting a little bit off subject here, but when we look at the Steelers quarterback situation and how dire it is without Aaron Rodgers, that should tell you something. That's why they're going to take a quarterback in this draft at some point. A lot of people nationally think it's going to be first round. I'm more of a third, fourth round guy, and see if you can hit the lottery, so to speak.
We're in the same boat. I also think Will Howard, if there is a Mason Rudolph comparison, you look at size, you look at talents, you look at experience, I think Will Howard has a lot of things going for him that's Mason Rudolph like, which is why I keep picking him in like the fourth round. I think he's a really good sweet spot for the Steelers. Shough, though, I also agree. There's just some people that want to force Shough to the second round, and I'm like, man, like, I don't see that. But hey, if he goes second round, good for him. That's awesome. But I'm right with you. Like, that's the range that they're looking for quarterback. I think this is a good backup quarterback draft class. It's not a good starting quarterback draft class. And that's why the Steelers should not try to get one of those guys in the first round, get one of these backups in the third round, fourth round. That could be the sweet spot to finding a guy that helps you out long-term at the quarterback position. But we also got to talk about our late round picks, because while those won't have the starter potential immediate impact that you look with these earlier picks, the finding of the right depth pieces is so important to draft classes and can often be the thing that helps get a franchise over the hump. When you think back to some of the late round picks that's helped out the Steelers in recent great years that they've had, in their different runs. We'll talk about who those guys are for our mock drafts as far as the guys this year in the mocks in the late rounds here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you, this show is also brought to you by UFC Gym. April is Stress Awareness Month, and studies show that doing even one group exercise class a week can significantly reduce stress. So there's no better time to move your body and reset your mind at UFC Gym. However you blow off steam, they've got it. They've got boxing, kickboxing, Zumba, MMA, HIIT, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, muscle makeover, spin, yoga, cardio core, bar, youth classes, and silver sneakers. Ready to feel stronger inside and out? Drop in this week at UFC Gym Market Square or the Waterfront to try a class for free at UFC Gym Pittsburgh. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's go over our late round picks here. Now, I believe these are actually aligned for us because the only addition and picks that I got was the third round pick. So let's go through our 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks for the Steelers. Now, we went different directions here. My 5th round pick, I went back and I got an offensive tackle, Logan Brown, out of Kansas. Not that I think that the offensive tackle is a priority, but I don't, without more, I think this is going to be an interesting situation. The Steelers, they're going to be starting Broderick Jones and Troy Fautanu this year as long as neither of them get hurt. But it's not clear what's going to happen at the backup tackle spot because that's not a spot that they've had. And I think that if you get an athletic type, not that Logan Brown would be their immediate backup offensive tackle. They'll probably use one of the veterans that they're bringing back last year from cheap. But I think it would be good to invest there. And that's just one spot that I thought in the 5th round, Logan Brown, he has a high athletic grade going in this class, a lot of rawness to him. He's 6'6", 311. That could be a useful pick in the 5th round. That's why I went that direction. But with your 5th round pick, you went with Yahya Black for Iowa defensive tackle, both of us going with beefier options just on different sides of the ball.
Yeah, and I think you still need a nose tackle. We talked about it in the first segment. And the later rounds really is where you can get those guys. Like you might have to go 3rd or 4th round, probably 4th round if you wanted a guy like Jamaree, Caldwell. But, we've talked in the past, Jordan Phillips would be in that range too.
Yeah.
This is just one round later, but Black is, I think, 6'3", 6'4", 336. He's that big nose tackle that the Steelers defense seems like it really needs right now. There was something missing, not only in that playoff game, Chris, but I go back to the regular season game in Baltimore. What was the name of that Giants running back who went for like 160 against them, like week 8 or week 9? It's just that it was more than just the playoff game. The run defense was lacking, and I think if you just get a bigger nose guard in there, like we talked about earlier, bump Keanu Benton out to 3 technique, have him be Larry's replacement. I think that's a path that they could go down.
I think to your point, this kind of shows that like it is a problem when I had to look up that name. I mean, it was Tracy Jr. was the running back for the Giants as Tyrone Tracy Jr. Yeah. I couldn't even remember who it was, and that's to your point. Like that became a problem, and when teams like the Ravens picked on it late, they didn't have an answer. And I do agree that's a priority in this. And I think that's the one thing that I did not do in my mock draft that I've been trying to do in a lot of my mocks is I did not get that run stuffing defensive tackle. I think Derrick Harmon could be that guy as a 5 tech. He could be a guy that flexes into that. But as far as a pure nose, like a big body who's going to take up space and take on double teams, I didn't get that guy. And so I thought it was interesting that you went for Black there. I went a different route with my doubling up at defensive tackle. I went for Ty Robinson in the 7th round out of Nebraska, because here's the thing. When you're drafting a defensive tackle late in the draft, they need to specialize in something. When you're looking at trying to get, because all the guys that are well-rounded, that are well put together, they're gone by that time. Most of those guys, they're first rounders. When you start getting to those late rounds, you need guys to specialize in something. So in your case, Yahya Black, that's a run stuffer. Jamaree Caldwell, not that he'll be around in the 5th round, but he was Derrick Harmon's teammate at Oregon. He's a bigger body, run stuffer type. Ty Robinson, though, is more of a pass rusher. And in fact, if you look at interior defensive linemen, the top 2 guys in creating pressures in last year in college football, according to Pro Football Focus, were Derrick Harmon, number 1, and Ty Robinson out of Nebraska at number 2. And that's why I went with him in the 7th round, saying like, hey, you know what? He might not work out. He might not be a guy. 7th round picks rarely do. But if he turns out to be a pass rush specialist that you can just throw out there on passing downs and give, Harmon, Hayward, Benton a break while still bringing pressure up the middle, that could develop into something long-term that does help you in the long run there. But again, it's just what kind of specialty defensive lineman do you want to add? And again, I think both of us seeing them double dip at this position shows it's important that they need to add there in multiple ways.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but your guy Robinson was one of the better testers at the combine, right? I think he jumped The vertical leap was the best among the D tackles. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, sometimes you just, some guys don't have the production, but they have the traits. And I think sometimes those guys fall. Talk about Shamar Stewart, right? Shamar Stewart,
Yeah.
first round target
Mm-hmm.
for most teams, didn't have the production, but he's got traits that can make him possibly an all-pro. Robinson isn't like that. It's a much different situation, but sometimes guys that just have rare athleticism, they didn't grow into it for whatever reason. It didn't mesh, with their production in college. But yeah, I'm with you. Like late rounds, take a flyer on a great athlete who could, maybe develop into something for you.
Absolutely. Let's talk about our 6th round pick because, we'll also get to your 7th round because I just showed my 7th round pick. In the 6th round, we went different directions again on different sides of the ball. I went for wide receiver Konata Mumpfield out of Pitt. I'll get into more on him later because obviously I have a direct connection with him. I covered him in college. I've been doing our in the draft series on him. But you went differently. You went for a cornerback in getting Justin Wally out of Minnesota, a guy that they've looked at and a guy that could be really interesting for the type of cornerbacks they've been trying to build for this defense.
Yeah, he was mostly an outside guy at Minnesota. And, sometimes that happens. There's just certain roles that you play in college for whatever reason. But he does have the versatility of 5'10" to bump in and play inside for you too. So that's been something that's been on his scouting report. And as you mentioned, he was in for a top 30 visit. We touched on this last segment. For me, I think corner is a need in this draft. I just don't think it's a need until day 3, just because you signed Darius Slay, you signed Brandon Echols. Beanie Bishop is still young. I think they like him enough to try to develop him. I just don't see a lot of room for guys have to be on the roster, right? If you pick a guy in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th round, those guys are going to be on the roster. 5th, 6th, 7th round, maybe you sneak a guy onto the practice squad if he's not ready. I think Wally is a guy who could compete for a 53-man roster spot as a rookie, but you also have that backup that if he doesn't develop into that, then maybe you could stash him for a year and let him develop.
Absolutely there. Konata Mumpfield, it's wide receivers are a tricky position for the Steelers because they've added DK Metcalf, right? Like they have DK Metcalf, they have George Pickens, they have Calvin Austin, they have Roman Wilson. So like they have 4 guys that you presumably think can be contributors in this offense. But the reason I went with Konata Mumpfield is because I think he does something that I'm not so sure they have a guy that on their roster that does this really well, and that's his ability to separate in the middle of the field, or separate against corners. DK Metcalf can get separation, but he's a bigger body, a faster guy that's going to use his overall athleticism to beat you and kind of bully you off the ball. George Pickens, he's more of a go up and get the ball type of guy. They have those traits. Calvin Austin can get separation; he's pure speed, but Konata Mumpfield is shifty, and that's what I covered him at Pitt for his entire career. And I've been doing the draft series. What's made him such an intriguing prospect for so many people around the NFL is at his pro day, he had several scouts looking at him. A Bill scout compared him to Stevie Johnson, a guy that used to be really good for them. Is his ability to run sharp routes. He's not the fastest. He ran a 4.59 in the 40-yard draft. He's not the tallest, but he is a guy who is extremely quick. He has worked on his routes to be very precise with what he does, and that's something that NFL coaches seem to love and scouts seem to love. PFF has moved him up into, I think, like the 150s as far as their rankings, but I have him drafted, getting drafted, somewhere on day 3 in the draft, in the draft right now, unless someone goes up and gets him. And the Steelers have shown interest. I've done a 3-part series. You can read that in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette if you're a big Pitt fan or you want to just learn more about Konata Mumpfield. He is a humble guy. He's been growing his whole life to get to this point, and he's been taking it step by step, day by day, just working his craft and working his process to be ready for the NFL draft. And during that process, at the combine, when I asked about who was talking to him, he brought up the Steelers on his own. He said Zach Azzani. He mentioned Zach Azzani. He mentioned the Steelers receivers coach, saying that that he said he felt like a good connection there. And then on his pro day, who was there working with him but Zach Azzani as they were doing Pitt's Pro Day, and he was working with him on his routes. And that's not saying the Steelers are definitely going to be in on Konata Mumpfield, but I think that a Mumpfield type of receiver in this draft will be very interesting. Kyle Williams out of Washington State, another guy who's a really good separator. I think he's going to go more like round 3 or 4, maybe 5, but still, those types of guys could be really interesting for the Steelers to look at receiver this year and just stash on their roster as a day 3 pick.
Yeah, and I've toyed with giving the Steelers a receiver throughout my 4 mock drafts. This time I just said, listen, if they trade George Pickens, they will definitely get a receiver and probably early. This mock draft, my final one, I said, they're pretty much set with the receiver. Let's assume they keep George. That's why I didn't give them one in this mock. Your
last pick, Hunter Wohler, Wisconsin safety there. What was the reason behind getting him?
Yeah, I mean, they've looked at some safeties. Nick Eamon came in. People don't really know this, but Ryan Watts, their 6th-round pick last year, had a pretty serious neck injury.
Yeah.
Some doubt about whether he can return this year. Deshaun Elliott's going into the last year of his contract. Wohler is another strong safety kind of in that mold. I'm not saying he's going to develop into a starter, but hey, listen, 7th-round pick, Wohler, you make the team, for your special teams abilities. Maybe you can grow into a backup or somebody that they can count on in some packages.
Absolutely. A lot of different directions the Steelers could go in this draft. We just displayed several of them here on our side-by-side mock drafts. Okay, Ray, what's up?
One more point. I'll give you the Kenny Pickett grades and the Tyler Shough.
Oh, yes.
6.40 for Kenny Pickett. Will become a good starter within 2 years. Okay, they were wrong. Okay, they got that one wrong. Tyler Shough, 6.16, backup with the potential, to be a starter. So there you go. Little different. There's your grades on those 2 guys.
There you go. There's the grades on those guys. And again, quarterback, a lot of different directions. And hey, it's the wildest position to predict, right? Because you'll see future potential starter in Kenny Pickett. Maybe a starting capability at Tyler Shough. There's so many people that think that trust me, I get emails about Tyler Shough's the guy. I don't know why you're passing up on him. I don't know why you're passing up on Shedeur Sanders, Jaxson Dart, every name. There's somebody that believes in every quarterback at some point in time. So it's always interesting to see where those guys go. We've got just 8 days before the NFL draft and the first round and where the Steelers might go, what moves they might make. We're going to keep analyzing every aspect of this here on the North Shore Drive podcast and here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thank you, Ray, for joining me here on the North Shore Drive podcast. And thank you all for joining us here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Reminder, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Back here Friday with Brian Batko, finishing out the week here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.